I'm really excited about today's episode because I've been wanting to do an episode on this topic for a while now. Finally able to get it into the schedule. Have you ever wrapped up an interview and thought, yeah, that was okay. That was fine. Nothing went wrong, but nothing really stuck either. There was no moment where you leaned in. There was no moment where you thought, is my audience even going to share this? It was just fine and a little meh. And so here's the truth. Most interviews don't fail. They just never go deep enough to truly matter. Not because your guest wasn't good, but because the conversation stayed safe. So today, we're going to fix that. Now, before we dive in, most of what I'm covering today is for interview-based podcasts. If that's your format, this one is for you. But honestly, these principles apply just as much if you want to start guesting on other people's shows, or if you're already doing it, you want to show up better. Because knowing what a great host is looking for makes you a way more compelling guest. So, whether you're asking the questions or you're answering them, stick around. Are you ready? Okay, let's dive in. Now, here's the reason why most interviews stay surface level. They follow the expected script, not your outline, the expected script. Things like, so tell us about your journey. What inspired your work? What advice would you give? And your guest gives the polished version of that, the answers that they've practiced during their show prep. The ones that sound good, right? But here's the thing. Your listener can feel when something is rehearsed. They may not be able to name it, but they'll feel it. And what they're actually craving is something real. Now, not too long ago, I was producing a client's episode where everything looked great on paper. Sharp guest, solid answers, was very excited to hear what she had to say. But halfway through the recording process, as I was listening to this interview, I began to think, wait, this isn't a real conversation. They're running a script. So I had the host ask a question that wasn't on the suggested interview question list. What part of this do you still struggle to believe today? Full stop. Everything changed. Her voice softened, she paused, and she got real honest. And that moment carried the entire episode. Not the strategy, not the tips, not the credentials, but that one honest answer. And that is what you're after. So let's talk prep for a second, because this is where most interviews are won or lost before you ever hit record. And here's something that may surprise you. You don't need more questions. You need better direction. So instead of a long question list of 15 to 20 questions, I want you to anchor your prep in 3 things. Where's the tension? Where did something shift? What does this mean for my audience? That's it. And if you know those 3 things, you can navigate anything in real time. The other thing is, don't just research what your guest has done. Pay attention to what they always say. Go listen to another interview they've done. And you'll notice pretty quickly there's a rhythm, a set of answers that they tend to default to. Now, your job isn't to repeat that. Your job is to go one layer deeper, because that's where great interviews are actually made, not in your original questions, not even in the suggested questions that they may send you or their PR person may send you, but it's in your follow-up questions, because the first answer is almost always the surface. The second answer, now that's where it gets real interesting. So when your guest says something like, it was a real hard season, and they don't move on, that's your moment. You can say something like, what made it hard? Or what did that look like day to day? Or even, what were you willing to tell yourself in that season? Now we're getting somewhere. Follow-up questions do three things. They slow down the conversation, they signal that you're actually listening, and they pull your guest out of autopilot mode. And here's where most hosts miss the mark. You don't need to rush into your next question. Especially don't say something like, okay, next question. You want to make sure that transition's there. But if something feels important, it is. So stay there. Dive a little deeper. So let's talk about listening. Not passive listening, intentional listening, because there's a real difference. And I've noticed that a lot of new podcasts are not doing this. Now, passive listening is waiting for your turn to talk. We do it all the time, right? Intentional listening is tracking what actually matters. So you're listening for emotion shifts, words they repeat, things they almost skipped over. Those are your clues, because that is where the story lives. Once I heard a guest say, I almost walked away from all of it, and then just moves on. But this particular host stopped her and said, wait, you almost walked away from everything? The guest laughed and said, yeah, but that's the whole thing. So she went there and asked a couple of follow-up questions, not to be rude or to find the dirt of the story, but to hear the part that truly impacted her, that made a difference, that maybe God showed up in that moment. That impacts your audience. Now, that particular episode was amazing and did really, really well because they didn't let the moment pass by without acknowledging it. Now, quick pause because this connects directly to what we've been talking about. If you're also showing up as a guest on podcasts, which I highly recommend, you need to know how to be great on that side of the mic too, because great guests make the host's job super easy. They answer clearly, they don't ramble, they bring depth without oversharing. And honestly, that's a skill most people don't think to develop. They think, I just have to show up. That's not always true. So inside of my podcast training program, How to Be a Great Guest, we walk through exactly how to do that. So you don't just show up, you actually connect. Now, if you've ever thought, I know I could be better in interviews, let's fix that. So if you're interested in doing that, go ahead and schedule a free discovery call and we can talk through it. Go over to wildfirecreativecompany.com/discovery call. Okay, let's talk about something that generally doesn't come up enough, and that's energy. Now, your interview doesn't need to be high energy, but it does need to feel alive. Because when everything runs at the same tone and pace, it starts to feel a little flat, even if the content is amazing. So we want to vary it a little bit. We want to slow it down when something matters. We want to speed it up in transitions. Let there be pauses. Let there be breath. And please don't be afraid of the silence. Now, I know we talked about this on another episode recently, but silence is where processing happens. And some of the best things I've ever heard a guest say on any podcast, whether I was producing it or not, will come right after a pause that the host almost filled because they were afraid of the silence. Your presence also matters more than your polish. Your guests can feel when you're distracted. They notice when you're looking at your phone, you're looking away, you're doing all these other things. They can feel when you're rushing. And they can absolutely feel when you're genuinely engaged with them. And that changes how they show up for you. Now let's talk about how we end an interview, because it really matters more than you think it does. Many people think, oh, I'm just wrapping up the episode. It doesn't really matter, but it does. So before you wrap up an interview, reflect on something back. Maybe something like, so what I'm hearing is ... That one statement creates clarity for your listener and signals that the conversation actually went somewhere. Then close with one final intentional question and not the, thanks so much for being here. Where can everybody find you? We hear that one all the time. But something more direct. For the woman listening right now, what does she need to remember? Now your guest is speaking directly to your audience. And the episode ends with purpose, not just a generic sign-off. So friend, you don't need better guests. You need better intention. Ask better follow-up questions. Stay in the moment. Don't rush the good parts, because that is where the impact lives. Remember, you can love Jesus and analytics, and life, my friend, is way too short for boring podcasts. I'll talk to you next time. Bye, y'all.